doing pretty well though? Okay, so what we'll do is when you ask a question, just shout it as loud as you can, and panelists, maybe you can kind of repeat the question a little bit. And what we'll do is we'll have the panelists just kind of pass the microphone around, but the audience just speak loudly, okay? All right, so let's hear first, do they want to start? Okay. Can you tell us your name?
So my name is Elaine Chan, and I'm an associate professor in teaching, learning, and teacher education. And I'm here because as a student, I went through French immersion programs, and I was learning Chinese because my family spoke Chinese. And these are my daughters. This is Alexandra Han.
My name is Alexandra, and I learn French and Chinese. My name's Lauren Hammond, and I speak Chinese and English.
Hi, my name is Magdalene Castillo. I worked for Dual Language for about 8 years. I'm a doctoral student, and right now actually I'm working as a science teacher, but I was in science dual language for a long time. So.
Hi, my name is Mary Espinosa, and I have taught at various levels in dual language on the Spanish side, and I am currently the coordinator for the dual language program at South High School at Omaha Public Schools.
I'm going to do a little trick that we do with these.
Show me, please. Like, don't push it around. There we go.
So maybe we won't get all tangled as we go tonight. My name is Katie Catlett. I have the pleasure of working in Omaha Public Schools. I'm the curriculum supervisor for dual language and world languages. Previous to this, I was a dual language teacher at Mars Magnet.
So I'm Stephanie Wessels. I'm an associate professor here in teaching, learning, teacher education. And before all that, I worked in a dual language school in West Liberty, Iowa. It was the first dual language school in this state.
I'm Kylie Guda, and I teach dual language at Omaha South. I teach dual language, algebra, geometry, basically all your lower level math classes.
Hello, I'm Jesus Jurado. I work here at Teachers College at the Spanish Studies Institute. I work for the Embassy of Spain, and I'm here because we have programs sending American students to Spain to work there as bilingual language assistants. And then we have teachers in Spain who come here to Nebraska and to the United States to work in dual language programs.
Hello, I'm Maria Perez. I'm a dual language teacher for 3rd and 4th grade, and now I'm a dual language lead teacher or resource teacher. I came with the program that he's talking about, and I'm still here.
Hi, I'm Dan Moran. I previously taught in Omaha for 6 years in the dual language program, and then 3 years ago I created the dual language program in Fremont. I now instruct in the kindergarten level and as well as coordinate that program.
Hi everyone, my name is Jose Lemus. I'm a dual language guinea pig. I went to dual language elementary school and preschool. This is my mom, so.
Hi everyone, my name is Isabel Velasquez. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Modern Languages. I research bilingualism, I research heritage speakers of Spanish in the US, and I train teachers who will be Spanish teachers. And I'm his mom.
Most importantly. Okay, so we're just going to open it up to the audience, and the way we can do this is you can just raise your hand. We'll try to do it without the microphone, so just shout. And you can ask a question, anything you want to know. You can ask it of one particular person, or you can just ask it in general for the whole panel. And anybody up here, if you think you know the answer, you want to answer, just kind of raise your hand and we can pass you the microphone. Does that sound like a plan? All right, do we have any first questions? Yes, my students. Thank you for being bribed to ask the first question.
I have a question for you, Jose Maria. You are a guinea pig, you said. What advantages you have being a guinea pig and a linguist person?
I think can you guys hear me without the microphone?
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of, there are a lot of different sections where being bilingual is advantageous. I think socially you're kind of more connected to different aspects of what American society is and is becoming. I think you have a lot of openness to different sections. Depending my work, I'm a community organizer, so my work is a lot of people interaction, a lot of going into communities and listening and trying to understand the nonverbal connections that people have. But then also professionally, it opens you up to a lot of different professional advantages from working abroad, from working with different communities, and then also just kind of being connected to my culture, my community is very advantageous, especially now when I want to reconnect and want to be able to understand where I come from.
For anyone who wants, I don't need the mic, do I? No. For anyone who would like to answer, if you could you possibly describe some of what you see as the obstacles to a wider implementation in the public schools of dual language immersion classrooms, not only across the curriculum?
I suppose that's probably most related to my work. I have the pleasure of overseeing our entire K-12 dual language program currently in Omaha. We have 10 schools that offer dual language, 6 elementary, 3 middle schools, and 1 high school. We started our program in 2000 with 60 students, and we now have 3,200 students in our program, more than 3,200 students in our program. So yeah, it's pretty exciting. I also am a parent to 2 kids, in case anyone has questions for parents. I have a high school, a freshman at South High. Ms. Labuda is her math teacher right now in geometry. And I have a 6-year-old in 1st grade, so kind of have both perspectives. But I think the biggest challenge for us is staffing, so we want to find high quality staffing. We take a different approach here in the Midwest, I think, than other places in the country, which is help people to grow into that once we hire them. So like when we hired Magali, we got her, we used the bilingual career ladder to help her get with some classes so that she could become a science teacher, and then she taught science for us for a number of years. And so we try to help the teachers we have grow into the teachers we need them to be. And I think that's a little different of an approach than other parts in the country, because they have a much more broader pool of bilingual applicants and a lot more access to programs such as this. This is just the second, endorsement opportunity in the state of Nebraska. So there really isn't, that's not always accessible to undergrads, and so we really have to grow them into who we need them to be. And so I think that's the most challenging is staffing, but it's doable. So we also have the visiting teachers program, which obviously if our lead teacher came through that program is advantageous as well and successful for us, but that is the most challenging for us, finding, especially also in high school, finding highly skilled, high content level teachers. We happen to be very fortunate in that we have people who find us in a variety of ways, and then half our high school teachers are Cuban. But we have, they're not all Cuban. They're not all, only half. We kind of have a joke, a lot of them, our joke is if our high school students want to graduate from our program, they have to understand Cuban Spanish. But they have connections too, so it's making a connection as well, and finding the alternative ways to help people become teachers, because there are a lot of people who have this idea and sense that they might want to be a teacher, and finding that pathway for them. So we've over 17 years had an opportunity to explore different ways to get the teachers we need. We don't feel like it's a big enough obstacle for us not to continue to expand. We still are continuing to expand our program. We have 3 strands that are in expansions phases, various expansions phases right now. So actually 4 if we think about the Spring Lake one that's somewhere in middle school. So yeah.
Okay, this is for the teachers. What kind of strategies using you when you teach dual language?
There's some things that are very particular to dual language.
So obviously, whether you're teaching Spanish or English or any other language, you need to use a lot of visuals, and just put yourself like you're in a different country where you're not speaking the language. The best way for you to pick up what is being said is through visuals. We use a lot of sentence frames, body partner with somebody where the other person speaks the language better. I'm sure everybody can say more things. Just yeah.
There we go. I like fishing, so I'll use this one. You kind of have to throw more bait when you are teaching students a different language. So where you may be able to say, if they were all English native speakers and you were teaching in an English traditional class, you may be able to just say important. But if you are in a dual language class, in order to get the attention of everybody, to get the engagement and for them to truly understand, you may have to use several different words. Like, I need you to, it is important, we're going to do it together. And maybe those aren't all synonymous, but you kind of just have to keep going and going. I have this strange habit of whenever I say something, I say it in 4 or 5 different ways. So in Spanish I might say like, es importante, es imperativo, es necesario, lo vamos a hacer. And so you just don't have, and I guess this would be dangerous for any teacher, but if I were teaching in English to English native speakers, I could kind of pass through some conversations and glide through it, just my normal conversational English. However, doing that in Spanish, given the demographic that I have, right now it's about a 50, it is exact 50-50 split of native English, native Spanish speakers. I have to really consider every word that I'm using.
To kind of piggyback off of that, I feel like at least in my position, we kind of have a variety of kids. So I have a lot of freshmen that come in and their math experience in Spanish is very mixed. I have a lot of ESL students as well, so the language differences in my classroom, you have to make sure that you try several different ways of saying the same thing to make sure that all your students get it, which really is great teaching in general. You know, you have to rephrase things in order to make sure all of your students understand. And so reaching your students by restating in maybe more than one language, it kind of depends on where your students are at. And I feel like at the beginning of the year, you really have to gauge, you know, kind of get a good idea of what language abilities your students have in order to make sure that you're reaching all of them at their level. So, and especially for math, I always remind them my first goal is that you understand math. Because for a lot of students coming in, they have often a negative frame of mind for math in general. So if I need to re-explain to you in English to start, great, that's what it takes. But by the end of the year, this is my expectation, that you are consistently using your Spanish more and more. And for my ESL students, working on that English development, so that way all of my students are developing their language throughout the entire year, both in their second language, their native language, and the math language, because it's its own language.
And some of her specific strategies that I can tell you from the things that come home with my daughter. First of all, her syllabus was closed notes. Has anybody ever thought about that at the high school level to like get your kids engaged in that fun task of going through a syllabus? Her syllabus was closed notes. I was like, why do you have to fill in the teacher's name? Oh, this is closed notes. So her syllabus was closed notes. She uses content and language objectives. Like I see that come home on Aaliyah's work. And so she sells herself short of the strategies that she does every day. But those are the kinds of things that like consistently Miss Lagoda uses in her math class. So those content language strategies. So I know if you go through your ESL or bilingual head endorsement, you're going to hear about that a lot. And then, yeah, the closed notes was a surprise. It was a nice surprise. I was like, why do you, oh, what a lovely surprise. So that's what I was going to say. Yeah, pretty nice.
Something related to teaching, but that was a little different. So in West Liberty, we started in preschool and kindergarten, and we added a grade as the first group went through. So to sell it to parents, West Liberty is a very small community, and we do have teachers from Spain coming over now because that staffing was an issue as well. But to pitch it to the community, we started out with a federal grant for $5 million. And so that first year we kind of were figuring out what kind of dual language it have, and we did have a 50-50. But to get parents to buy in to it, especially native English-speaking parents, what we did is they learned to read in their dominant language first, And even though they were still exposed to Spanish during math and some of the other times, they did learn to read in their dominant language first. And so that's really critical when you go to pitch a dual language program, because some parents are sitting back saying, well, what about my child learning to read? So it was either in Spanish they were learning to read in their dominant language or in English. And so we added a grade as we went up, and then in high school it became more Spanish maintenance type of classes that they were teaching. So, and they have graduated students in dual language. So just on the earlier end, that literacy instruction becomes really important for parents, and that guarantee that they will read to learn to read in that dominant language was critical for us to really pitch.
How do you think you got buy-in? Sorry. How do you think you got buy-in within your community for people to be interested in wanting to have it?
So we did a lot of campaigning. We did a lot of proposing biliteral, bicultural. West Liberty is a very interesting community. It's right outside of Iowa City. It's about 15 minutes out west or east of Iowa City. But it's a huge meat packing plant. And so the community is actually a majority community. What the buy-in, who we had the most trouble with, is our native Spanish-speaking families, because they were so trained to, you're here in the United States, you need to learn English. So we really had to do a campaign for our native Spanish-speaking families, because some of our native English-speaking families like, this is a gift that I can give my child. I can't give my child anything else, and this is what I can give them. So we had 2 sections that were dual language, and we had 2 sections that were traditional English. But the wait list was bigger in dual language for the native English-speaking families. But to keep it at a 50-50 or a 60-40 model, we really had to watch what native language was coming in. So we had to really campaign for that native Spanish, and then it did, parents understood what we were doing. But they've been so trained, and we hear it all the time, is you're here in the United States, you should learn English. And here we are proposing, hey, we want your child to be, biliterate, bicultural, and so it was. We weren't expecting that. That was a huge change for us.
Was it difficult to get buy-in from the school?
Well, we received federal funding, so all of a sudden we had a little gift from the federal government that said, you can try this. And what the nice thing that continued is every grade just expanded. So we started, early. And it continued all the way through. So there was buy-in all the way through.
Can I just get, before we move on to the 2 new panelists that have joined us, could you just introduce yourselves and say what you have to do with dual language?
Okay. Hi, I'm Ms. Alvarez. I was in the dual language program at myself. I'm Aurora Alvarez, and I was also in the dual language itself. I'm Aurora Alvarez. I was also a dual language student at South. I graduated 3 years ago.
I calmed them into coming. And then mom's in the back.
And another student.
Can I ask a question about parent engagement in dual language programs? I think we see as one of the potential benefits in a dual language program is bringing in parents who are not dominant English speakers, right, that who are speakers of a minority language, who we often see or we feel don't participate in school in the school experiences of their students as much as we would like. And we imagine that dual language environments are more inviting to those parents. Can we hear some experiences in that regard?
Just a running joke. Most of our dual language teachers, like at ParentTeacher Conferences, the joke is that we are usually the last to leave. So the
I
end
didn't
of
even get to
conferences,
go see her this year.
and I've had parents who I've seen them come. I have a line of parents waiting to see me, and they leave because they have to wait, and then I have to make lots of phone calls home, which is great. So other teachers are complaining at conferences because they have nothing to do. They're sitting there watching movies in the back, and I have parents one parent leaves, and I have another one coming. So I legitimately feel like parent engagement is significantly higher. My very first year of teaching, this is my 7th year at South. My first year, I did not teach dual language. And so I kind of had that similar experience of conferences where, okay, I had a few parents, we had a sign-in sheet, maybe I filled 1 page. And consistently, after starting to teach in dual language, I can fill 3 pages front and back of parents who sign in. So
I think it does, though, require some focused effort. Just by having dual language, it doesn't necessarily increase the engagement. There are activities that need to happen and moves that a building needs to take to increase that engagement purposefully. But I think it then becomes a little bit more self-moving. It's not quite as hard to shove that parental engagement to improve it. You know, our parents often can now come to school and they can talk to someone who perhaps understands what their own education system was like if they're an immigrant. Or there's a lot more direct conversation. So one of the things that I remember as a teacher, that because I could communicate directly with all of my parents without going through an interpreter, my classroom management was a non-issue, because I'd look at the kid and walk to the phone, and then they know, because they knew I could call, and I imagine that was a thing too, and parents could also contact me. But in all of our dual language schools, there's different levels of parental engagement, and so there certainly is an impact on being purposeful about it, but at the same time, our elementary school in our district that has the highest parental engagement in our district, the reason why they have that is because early on in our parent compact for dual language, we ask that parents participate 20 hours every school year if their child is going to participate in dual language. If they don't, we do nothing about it. But at the school that Dan was at, that means that over 10,000 hours are given every year by the parents at Gomez to the school to participate. So they have 2 outdoor classrooms that are heavily supported by that work. So and a lot of different things. So it depends. You still have to do some things to show what it is that you want and set an expectation, because also culturally the idea of coming into the school and working is not necessarily as common practice in other countries. So we have to show them what we want, but obviously it's a lot easier because dual language parents don't have to go through a translator to talk to their teachers.
I can also say, I've been at South, this is my 4th year at South, and every year I try to do something to bring parents into South. And I have found that the biggest success comes from personal invitations. We've done letters, we've done the robocalls, but I found that when we were able to call them and personally invite them, but not just invite them to come in, but to bring something to share, because parents don't always want to just go and get. They want to bring something to the table as well. And I do think that has a lot to do with it too. Not only what can we offer them, but let them show what they can offer us as well.
So to add to what she's saying, I think when you value the strengths of the parents, then they are more comfortable on coming to school. I know in Catalano we've done sewing classes where some parents were teaching other parents, and they made costumes for our kids. Some parents have even come to a school and be as a reading support volunteer. They don't get paid, but they help in the Spanish classroom, because some of them many of them can read and can help in the Spanish classrooms. They just, usually if they go to a regular school, they don't feel, we all know that when you go to a different culture where you don't speak the language, you become a little bit shy and your self-esteem may go down a little bit, but when you know what to do, you can share with everybody, then you're more likely to come and share.
And I want to elaborate on that as well a little bit. My daughter went to an immersion program in Sacramento, and it was based on Cantonese. And so their goal was to have 1/3 of the class who spoke only Cantonese, 1/3 of the class who spoke both languages, and then 1/3 of the class who spoke English. And then through the interaction with the students, work towards both languages, fluency in both languages. And one of the things I really did notice was that a lot of the parents were people who didn't speak English. And so by virtue of language, these people would be people that wouldn't be included in what was happening in the school. But because they could speak and they could interact and they could ask questions in a language that they felt comfortable in, it made a difference in terms of people who were willing to ask questions in school, who were willing to take part in activities. But I also agree that there was a lot of activity that needed to support in the beginning to engage the parents and to have them feel that they were welcome and that they wanted to be in class. And the other thing is, just the language being spoken in the classroom as we were waiting for people, the children to come out during the day, at the end of every day, there was a level of comfort in that the parents could speak a language, they could speak in Chinese and know that the other parents would understand them, or that they were in a situation where somebody could understand or could help them translate, because there were such a large number of people that spoke both languages that it made communication a lot easier. And so I think thinking about engaging parents in school, and one of the biggest complaints for parents who don't speak English is that they can't communicate with others in the school without the help of a translator. And in a situation where it's an immersion program or a dual language program, that's taken care of to a certain extent, that you've got built-in translators and people who feel that the language is welcome in the school community.
We did something called Skies Night, so it was stood for Sharing Knowledge in English and Spanish. And so it was a celebration of both languages, because that's what we were hitting. And so we would do different things, and we tried to do it quarterly, involve both parents, groups of parents, so they would meet each other. So it wasn't just a separate community of English-speaking families and Spanish-speaking families, that they were both coming together. So we did a lot of, and we just called them Skies Nights. And so some nights would just be like learning to read to your child, or we had like a new math curriculum when I was there, and we would do those types of things. But it was a celebration of both, and getting those two communities together.
Can I ask the students, and can we start with Alexandra? Okay. And can you tell us, was it hard at first when you were studying Cantonese?
Kind of.
What did you do to make it easier? Do you remember?
I practiced at home.
Practice at home with your mom? Excellent. What about any of the other students that are here? Do you want to say anything about your first experiences? And you can tell the truth.
I mean, your experience is probably more significant than mine, so if you guys want to go first.
Okay. So, I don't know, you go first. We've kind of always grown up with Spanish, so it's always been around, but being in the classroom, it helped a lot because we were hearing it every day and more than just one class. So it was a lot of the repetition, I think, that helped. Yeah, repetition, and then a lot of your friends in the classroom also know Spanish, so it wasn't how do I explain this? Some people knew Spanish, some people knew English, but everybody could be, it wasn't looked down on, I guess, to speak Spanish in the class because everyone understood you anyways. So yeah, it just kind of made a little family, I guess.
Yeah, I think my experience was different just because I only went to elementary school and preschool as a dual language program, so the home was really where I spoke Spanish. My parents mostly only speak Spanish, and then everywhere else spoke English. So that's kind of where my Spanish was kind of reinforced and practiced and appreciated, I guess.
I'm not a dual language student. But I have just happened today to have read a case study. At UNO, we offer a Spanish language arts class, and one of the things that my students do is a case study with a student. And so I had one that turned hers in just the other day, and she had interviewed a student, and one of the questions was, what do you remember about speaking when you were first entered dual language, when you were in the primary? And her response was, I was so embarrassed to speak English because I didn't know what I was saying, I didn't understand everything that was going on. And then we went through the case study, and then later on it says, what are you most proud about now that you're at the high school? And she said that I am comfortable speaking with anybody in any language in the community, and that I can help my family speak in English if that needs it, or I can help somebody who needs help with Spanish. And she's a freshman, and she has already come to that level of comfort with both levels. So I just wanted to share that.
Could I just add something also? I was talking with the principal in Toronto, and this is backed up with research anyways, but it's a French immersion program in Toronto, and they have standardized testing at the grade 3 level, grade 6 level, and grade 9 level, and they had just received their standardized test scores, and she was saying that the students' scores were above the scores for the non-immersion program students in English, and so I thought that was really interesting. that students who are going to school all day long in French and had English introduced to them later on, I think it's at grade 4 level, so this would have been after the test, but they scored at levels either equal to or above students who were in French immersion. And so I know that a lot of parents worry about that their children, if they go into an immersion program, that they won't be able to speak the language of the minority, or the majority of the mainstream language. But from what this principal was saying, it's a pretty common thing that we would have immersion student scores higher than that of English. And I think it comes to, I think Theresa has probably talked about this idea of the interlanguage and the support through language development across languages. But from a parent perspective, that was very reassuring. And like I said, it is supported in research, but for the principal to say this and to actually see it on the website and for the school, it was helpful as well.
It kind of reminds me, we were actually talking about this just before we began, the idea that some of our students, if they're struggling in one language, they can actually, now they have 2 language bases that they can, if they encounter a new word, they have more of a language base to help them to identify something that's unfamiliar to them. So, especially with Spanish, they have various roots that they can kind of rely on in multiple languages to help them navigate around a new idea or a new word or concept.
That's what our data shows, by the way. The benefit of having a program for 17 years is that you can see data for a long time, and you can see long-term data, and our high school students outperform our district. But our high school students don't look like our district. They're higher poverty and higher ELL than our district is, or current and former ELL, much higher current and former ELL, a little bit higher in poverty, but they outperform our district every year. And more of them get scholarships to college, more of them go on to 4-year universities. Sorry, completely different, right? So, yeah, that's what our data shows, and so we don't have to sell ours to our community anymore. In fact, our wait list is quite large, so we can't nearly accommodate everyone who's interested. We have been able to get over that hump with our, for the most part, with our Spanish-speaking families. They know that their kids will do better in dual language just because a community is a community and they communicate amongst each other. So that's why we added our other strand at Castelar, because the wait list was bigger than it was a lot of students. It was almost every kid that was not in dual language in kindergarten last year was on the waiting list. So yeah.
And having 17 years of data to prove that our students are successful in both languages, especially in assessments that are given to them in English, help us to reassure. Somebody had asked, what about those parents that want to put their kids into a program, and you say, are they going, what's going to happen with their development of their first language? And it's another piece that we can show them that says they'll be fine. And it's been fine for all of these students, your student will be fine too. It just helps reassure those parents that their child will be okay.
And I'm surprised when, I think it was you said that the Spanish speakers in one of the towns, how do you sell it to them? The families, the Spanish speaker families. In our case, it's the opposite. They come to me complaining about their kids that are not in dual language, that are losing their language and they cannot communicate with the family, and they're upset. They don't want them to lose their language, their family language, and they want in dual. We have a huge waiting list of them wanting to get in dual because they don't want to lose their family and the roots of their family.
I have a question. It's probably more of a technical question for OPS. So you guys have a cadre of students, so they start in primary schools, but then what if they want to get into the program in middle school? And then what is the retention as far as once they start the program with you? It sounds very high to me, but I would like to know that. And then the other thing is, what is the English speakers retention of the language beyond your program?
So our program goes all the way through 12th grade.
Right.
So they go on to college, and actually we don't really track them too much after that. And so
are they fluent by the time?
Oh yeah, they take, like my daughter right now is taking honors geometry and Spanish with Ms. Laguda. She has honors biology. She has honors U.S. history. All of that's mostly in Spanish. And so, and she is assessed more in Spanish than in English. We do some assessments in English because of lots of reasons, but so she's held accountable to perform in high school level academic content areas in Spanish, and she's an English dominant student. I speak Spanish. And she's in Spanish speakers, the second level Spanish speakers, and has an A. She's got a 4 on a summative, and I gave her a high five. She's a little lazy. So, on a big summative, like an essay paper. So, yay! But in terms of getting into, so the way it works, our dual language program works, is most of our kids enter at kindergarten. I don't know what our retention is because we do have mobility in our district, and in some of our schools you need to live in the neighborhood to continue in the school because of capacity. So, in elementary in particular, but even one of our middle schools is getting to be that way. So, most all of our kids enter at kindergarten, but and an English speaker can enter our program without question by the end of first semester of first grade, which is what nationally people will say is when you should stop. We have other English speakers who've entered later under special circumstances, but it's not very common. Spanish speakers enter our program really at any time. So all the way into high school, a Spanish speaker, if we have room, will come in, or that's also around 2nd or 3rd grade, depending on the elementary school. Our newcomer program and our dual language program merge. We can't serve all of the newcomers or the kids with who have limited English in kindergarten and first grades at our dual language schools because we're strands within schools. But around 2nd grade, if we have a newly arrived student who is Spanish only speaking, they will go into our dual language program. So, so that means by the time we get into our middle school and high school, we have way more kids who would have qualified for English Learner Services, way more Spanish speakers than English speakers because of that piece right there. So our English speakers, we still are in a monolingual English society, and so it's not necessarily a value to them when they get hard, when it gets difficult. And some of them are pretty savvy and telling their parents that it's too hard for them, even when we show them that it's not. And so it's optional, really, but many do stick through. The thing is that people will go to our high school and think we don't have any English speakers in our program, but our English speakers look like our Spanish speakers in most cases. So because our program in many cases is neighborhood based, and the neighborhoods where our dual language program are for most of our schools are in high Latino population, very high percentage of Latino people. We have English speakers whose parents or grandparents may have spoken the language, but they do not as children. So sometimes, and even sometimes, leaders will walk in and say, well, you don't have any English speakers here. And we're like, no, that you can't pick them out because we do have, while most of our Latino community in Omaha is more recently arrived, not all of them are. So we do have generations in Omaha in that part of the city. So, but we don't exit kids because they struggle in Omaha. So if a student ends up with a learning disability, we accommodate that within dual language. If student is struggling, we want them to stay because we know that the research even shows for students with IEPs or learning disabilities that they'll perform comparably to or slightly better in a dual language program in English than they will if they were in an English only program. And so we want them to stay, and we work really hard for them to stay. That's not saying that a parent who loves their child very much isn't going to say this is too much for you and pulls the child out, which we highly suggest against, because what happens when they get to high school and they get recommended for an honors class and the child doesn't want to work that hard for an honors or an AP class, you set the standard a couple of years ago when you let your child bail when it was what you perceived as too hard, but how can we support the child? So we don't, when we add our kids in, we don't, only thing we really want to know is what does the parent say is the language most frequently spoken by the child. So we even have our early childhood programs refer kids to us with learning disabilities or autism or whatever, and because, especially if they're Spanish speaking, because then we know we can keep them communicating with their parents for a lifetime, which is important.
What's one of the beautiful things about South is we have buy-in for the entire staff. And so I work very closely with the special ed department, and she sends me the names of the students with IEPs, and we talk about it, and we talk about, you know, what that second language is, you know, how is that going to merge with their IEP? What strategies does the teacher need to look at specifically for that child? And that's the same thing with our ESL department. We work very closely as to what classes we feel would be best to get them that English that they need and support their native language and their Spanish instruction so they can also continue with their native language. And every single department has just become so open to the idea of teaching and so supportive. Our counseling department as a whole is so supportive of continuing our students in dual language. You rarely hear about somebody discouraging a child to take a dual language course and then therefore consequently eventually dropping out. It just doesn't happen at South anymore. We just have a lot of
support. South is the DOOR program, is that like a school within a school kind of concept? Or is it very much integrated?
It's very much integrated.
And what is the percentage of students who is in the program?
We have 700 dual language students in a school of 2,500 students. So whatever the percentage is.
Yeah. We have about 4 content area teachers in each content area, so 4 math, 4 science, 4 social science. Plus they have to take Spanish language arts. And we
call Spanish for Spanish speakers and then AP Spanish, they continue with that.
And we, early on in our dual language program, we committed to K-12 and we committed to K-12 for whatever strands we created in pathways. So a lot of K-12 programs in the country will not have enough space for all of their dual immersion kids at the elementary level, and so they do some kind of filtering to get them into their middle and high school programs, and we don't do that. So when we had to change a feeder pattern for Castlear a number of years ago and send the kids to a different middle school, then we opened a dual language program at that middle school. So we just keep increasing the capacity for South. Sorry.
We're fine.
They're fine. They like our kids.
We are fine. We like having them come, and the district placement office even has a unique placement situation that they do just for our dual language pathway, where the parents get to choose South. The parents that are not of that home attendance area get the opportunity to choose South and put their child in South before other students.
All that being said, English native speakers in our program, we design some things in the schools to support the Spanish language. Because they speak English at home, there is nobody at home that can help them with the Spanish. So they're gonna always feel a little bit less supported. It's not like the Spanish speakers where they have English everywhere. So it's good that schools design programs or ways or activities to support the Spanish a little bit more. Like you can create a Spanish club for those English native speakers, or motivational strategies to have them speak more Spanish. Otherwise you will end up in 5th grade, everybody speaking English. I don't know how.
Well, and it really comes down to the district, the staff. Everyone as an individual and everybody as a whole at implementation. You know, if that first teacher is somebody who can rationalize even to 5-year-olds what the reason is why they're there, or why, you know, the myriad reasons are that brought them there, what's going to happen, why they need to keep trying, then it becomes accepted as a norm for those students. So when you, like in my class, we talk about just in like daily discussions, oh, it's going to be really cool if you can do this because then you're going to be able to help this person. And you have to really, we've talked about how to sell it to parents, you have to sell it to kids. And I know that kindergarten may be their first experience in school, but they've had options in their life and they're going to commit to it or not. So if you can get a 5-year-old to understand the power of being able to communicate with everybody in that classroom, or everyone in the community, if you can get a 5-year-old to understand I had a girl who's going to Mexico. I don't know if it's related to her birthday. She claims it is. But she's a native English speaker, and she keeps telling me how she can't wait to use that when she goes to Mexico. And she's like, well, I'm going to be the one that has to order the food. And good for her. She'll get dessert first, probably. But the thing is, my children, I have half native English speakers, and the first 4 months of this year, I haven't had a complaint except for the first week or two about I don't get what you're saying, or I don't understand, or why are we doing this? It's done because you know, that's the idea that I've implemented, and I've really pounded that in of we're doing this because of this. And if you don't, if you try to go around it and it's just day one, this is what we're doing, then they're going to catch on. If you don't really describe it to them, explain it to them, they're going to catch on and say, hey, this is harder than something I could be doing. And at that point, you know, then you do get fifth graders that say, well, this seems harder than just being in English, so I'll try to weasel my way through. Is that what it was? I'll try to get out of it. So yeah, it really starts day one, and if you do it right, then it really doesn't become a question or an issue.
I like to remind my students, Spanish is actually my second language. I didn't start studying Spanish until I was in 8th grade. So I really like to remind my students that, yeah, it's difficult, but if you stick with it, it makes your life so much easier. And had I had the opportunity that they have, I feel like my Spanish would be better. I mean, obviously, they thought it was good enough that I can teach dual language. But I wouldn't be where I'm at if I hadn't taken the time to actually study and stick with the Spanish and not lose the language. So reminding them that, yeah, I know it's easier to speak in English because English is my first language, but why not speak in your second? Because it's so much more fun.
I am part of the teacher education program here for elementary education, and a lot of us don't know 2 languages, and I mean, dual language programs really intrigue me, and I don't know another language.
We need bilingual friendlies. That's what we call our speakers.
Bilingual friendlies. What would you like to see, on the college level for teacher educating teachers who are going to be, I guess, yeah, students who are going to be teachers?
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, what would you like to see in teacher prep programs, on the university level for us who don't know languages but are interested in it?
It would be super helpful if you got an ESL endorsement at the same time that you were getting your undergrad, if that was just something that now happens. In Omaha, 35% of our students qualified for ESL, 20,000 kids qualified for ESL services at some point in their life. So really it's not optional for us to use ESL strategies in our teaching. So now it's 45% of the district. So it's a good chunk of our district, of our students. So it'd be super helpful, but at least one course, about working with English language learners would be, I think we're getting, at least in urban settings, it's a tipping point. We're there. If a special education course is required, it's much more likely in our situation that you're going to work with English learners than it is that you're going to be solely responsible with working with a student with special needs. So that would be super helpful.
It probably wouldn't even hurt to take a language course, just to get your feet wet and see what it's like to be in that environment. And it doesn't even matter what language, whatever language interests you.
And it's not
just
too
to
late.
get an idea of what it's like. No, it's never too late.
I learned Spanish because I wanted to be an ESL teacher. I took 5 years of French in middle school and high school, and I cannot speak much. I'm dangerous, I can understand it, but I can't speak it. But then when I got to college, after soul searching and studying some other things, I decided I wanted to be an ESL teacher, so I started studying Spanish in college. And now I'm bilingual, I've taught in dual language, and I lead our district's dual language program. So it's not too late. But we also need bilingual friendly. So we need people who value language so much, even if they don't have it themselves, that they can be on the English side of dual language and let go. Because you have a partner teacher who's going to be teaching half of your content standards, and you both are going to be not judged, but we all feel judged as teachers by the results of our students' assessment, and you have to know that that's okay, that we are going to share that responsibility for our kids to be successful. So, and value what's happening in that other classroom so much so that you don't try to impede or dictate or take over what's happening in that other classroom, that you're willing to collaborate and communicate and know that what's happening there is equally as important or more so than what's happening in your room. So we need bilingual friendlies. That's always, because most of our English side teachers in elementary don't speak Spanish.
I think I would add two things. If you can invest in traveling abroad, wherever you want to be, it's very important to know the experience of not being the center, of not the world not accommodating to you. That is a very, very valuable experience. And if you can invest in any course, not necessarily language, of course we will be happy to have you. We're talking about languages. But any course in sociology, anthropology, political science that helps you understand what diversity means, and that you will be a teacher to a student body that deserves quality education. And quality education doesn't necessarily look the same for every student that you will encounter. So that would be a good investment of your time.
Let me say, if you don't mind working as a language assistant abroad.
There's an opportunity to learn Spanish.
There is a program called Cultural Ambassadors in Spain. Okay?
You know that.
So I have a question. What about, I hear that we should have ESL training and travel experiences. What about actual training in linguistics? How important, and does that happen in Spain in part of teacher education? Like, do teachers just learn about language and study language? And how important would that be for as a teacher? Because I didn't really learn about it until graduate school. And I feel like it would have been really useful when I was in the classroom as a K-12 teacher to just have the chance to study language.
It's part of an ESL endorsement.
Oh, okay.
It's a big component of an ESL endorsement is our linguistics. Yeah, so it's a critical component in an ESL endorsement. It kind of depends on what you're going to teach in terms of where you need to put your emphasis, but that's why we encourage an ESL endorsement, because it contextualizes linguistics. When I took linguistics as part of my ESL endorsement, it was a few years ago, so my oldest is 20, so a few years ago. So it was not contextualized for me, so I didn't understand how to apply it in the classroom. But now I think ESL endorsements have come a long way, because this was back when there weren't very many English learners in the state of Nebraska. And the beauty of learning that and in terms of it being a teacher and getting an ESL endorsement is it's contextualized to what you do. So I think through an ESL endorsement, that would be the best pathway for a teacher.
I took linguistics actually as an undergrad because I'm dual endorsed math. Okay, well, actually now endorsed math, Spanish, ESL, and bilingual ed. But I took it as an undergrad as part of my Spanish endorsement. And kind of the same idea is, I thought it was cool because I love language, obviously, but it didn't really mean a whole lot for me. It was just something cool that I knew. And then I took it again as part of Spanish phonetics and phonology, which I felt like helped me understand better the components of language in relation to Spanish. But then as far as how I can help my because with the ESL endorsement, I felt like I started to understand more how to help people who don't speak the same languages at all. Because in your classroom, not just in dual language, but you'll get kids, like I've had kids who are from Nepal and Thailand, and I didn't understand, okay, well, how do they make this sound and why doesn't this make sense? So it contextualizes it as far as being able to help not just your kids in dual language, but other students that you might be in contact with.
And if you think dual language, being in a dual language classroom, especially in the elementary, is your dream, your pathway, find some dual language schools. I'm pretty sure we've got, find you some. And visit and talk to those teachers that are, and I love this term, bilingual friendly, it's the first time I've heard it, and find those teachers and ask them firsthand, you know, what do you do to support the Spanish side teacher? What does the Spanish side teacher do to support you? Where do you struggle in dividing your curriculum, and what are your successes in sharing your curriculum? And, you know, get it firsthand from the people who are there. It's a great place to do your practicums.
Our kids are so used to people coming and going.
Oh,
There was one day
they're
we had
bad
people in from, I think, Connecticut or something a few years ago, and there were like 10 people in the back of the room, and the kids are just so used to people coming and going that they're like, why are they here? Oh, they just wanted to watch you. Okay. And then they just go back to what they're supposed to be doing. They usually act better on those days, but.
We'll come back.
But sincerely, I feel like the best, I don't feel like I understood dual language as well until I watched a classroom and then until I was thrown into it. So.
Can I just make also a comment? So even if a teacher goes into a school and the school is not a dual language school and it's not a bilingual program, I think that mainstream teachers can actually still do a lot to contribute to supporting the development of positive attitudes towards language learning. You know, I've had students talk about local schools being English-only schools where the students are encouraged not to, or discouraged actually from speaking anything but English. And as a teacher, you can say something about that, and at the very least, don't repeat that. I would think. And then, if you know that some of your students speak another language in the home, it's something that you can encourage by saying, you know, acknowledging that it's something positive that's happening. And those are things that you can do even without any language training, without without language training, but just being supportive and encouraging them. Because even if the school doesn't have resources to support that, there are other places in the community that can support it, and recognizing that as a positive.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Can I piggyback on something she said? Sorry, real fast. I know I'm talking a lot. So one of the things that I feel like we underestimate with dual language is the number of students, especially as we get more immigrants from some of your South American countries, is the fact that you might have students now in your classroom who speak 3 languages or 4. And I thought of this because I actually have several students who were trying to teach me Cancoban over the summer. Spanish is their 3rd language, and they always have described to me that it's hard to speak in Spanish, and their parents really try and they appreciate that their kids are learning Spanish and they're learning English in the same classroom. So they're developing not just their 2nd language, but they're developing their 2nd and their 3rd in the same classroom. So being supportive of those kids who maybe it's their 2nd or their 3rd or their 4th language, even if you're not speaking in one of those languages, is really, really helpful for those kids and really makes a huge impact to make them feel welcome and comfortable. So.
If I can briefly add a kind of pointed political question, knowing it's the last things, but a blunt observation of this panel is there's nobody from the dual language program in Lincoln Public Schools, because there is no dual language in Lincoln Public Schools. And there are people in the audience who very much are advocating for that. And I wonder if there's anybody on the panel that has advice for how, I mean, Omaha, it's built in now, which is wonderful. Fremont, it's tentative, but boy, it's a million miles ahead of where we're at. I'm wondering if there are suggestions about what gets it past whatever hump it is that's keeping Lincoln, which likes to think of itself as cosmopolitan, certainly is diverse, certainly thinks of itself as inclusive. What gets a dual language program going here, or in your mind?
May I say something? I represent Lincoln Public Schools, and the reason I am here is just for that very reason. I need to find out more about it, and I'm fairly new to this position since July as a curriculum director. So I am taking great notes, and I want to get a hold of every single one of you on the panel, especially you OPS people, because you are our counterpart, and I think it's important for us to know, and Fremont too. I think I need to hear more of the success stories and what is the struggle and how you overcame that. I think it's very important. I am not guaranteeing anything, and I'm not promising anything on behalf of LPS, but my daughter is also wanting to be a bilingual. I'm originally from Japan, so she's learning Japanese, but if I had a Japanese bilingual program, dual language course, my life will be much easier than myself teaching that to my daughter. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and I will take that to my heart, and I will report back to my executive team. Thank you.
It seems like a much more daunting task than it actually is. So right now we're helping a couple of different places get things going. So one in Omaha The Catholic schools are starting in the fall. The Archdiocese are starting in 2 elementary schools, and then Denison, Iowa is also starting a program next fall. And for me, whenever I work with districts on starting programs, I lean towards keeping it simple rather than complex. So looking where your demographics in a school lend itself to having the type of program that you want to have. If you want a 90-10 or a 50-50, if you want a heritage language or a dual two-way immersion program. It's not, I guess the biggest piece of advice or the biggest thing that's changed in 17 years is it's not nearly as difficult to start a quality dual language program today as it was 17 years ago. If it's a Spanish-English program, there are plenty of resources, there are plenty of professional development, there's plenty of research, there's plenty of data, there's plenty of kids, there's ways to get staff that works really, really well for us. You know, our students, the reasons to do it far outweigh the reasons not to do it. You know, so those are the kinds of things. I think one of the hurdles in Lincoln is that linguistically, you have our second largest language after Spanish for our English learners is Karen, and and they're mostly refugees and are not familiar with dual language education, and so they aren't asking necessarily for it. But we do some native language supports for them on our Saturday school because we don't have teachers. But it doesn't mean that someday if we don't have enough teachers for Karen that we won't go down the path of Karen. A dual language, or probably not a two-way immersion program for Karen, more of a heritage speakers program for Karen, and maybe more transitional bilingual education if possible. But you know, it's always about looking what you have and starting. Just go, plan, please plan, because it has to go well. You know, and just go and see and figure out what it is that you want and ask for help. Because it is much easier today than it is in the past. I've added 4 or 5 schools since I came into this position, and so, you know, adding schools takes some PD with teachers and staff and community, but by and large, if you go about it the right way, people are open to it. So in our district, we actually most recently have implemented it in the schools that had some struggles with test scores and were high ELL. So what do? You make the right program for the kids who are there. And so that's why we put dual language in our last 2 elementary schools. So, but it's definitely doable. And when you start at 1 grade level at a time, if you do a 2A 50-50 program like we do, you only need 1 teacher a year. So, and typically in a large school district, you can find that teacher. So when we started our program 17 years ago, our first 2 dual language teachers have been on our staff for a long time. One is now a principal and one's retired. So do it. We'll help you. We'll help you.
I'm just going to allow one more because my students, this panel is for my students, and I wanted Gigi to ask the
I was going to add a success story for the UNL person. Oh, no, UNL. Yes.
And then
so when I came here my first year, obviously you believe in bilingualism because I was coming myself to learn English because I wanted to be really bilingual. Not what I thought I was bilingual, and then I came here and I was like, no, I'm not bilingual. But my first year I was teaching 3rd grade, and my good experiences, I mean, it was with everybody, but when my ahas moments, they say here, was with the English native speakers. They're in 3rd grade, and they're writing 3-4 pages essays only in Spanish, and they are speaking to me in Spanish, almost with no accent in English. I mean, you could really barely say they are Americans. And for me it was like, I've been a whole year teaching these kids. They don't have any Spanish at home, and they're able to do all these things. I wish I have had that opportunity when I was a kid, because my English now would be different, and the windows that it opens, the doors that opens. For me, it was like, that's a success story, and that's why you start a bilingual. And just think in Europe, if you go to Germany, Switzerland, or any of those countries, they've been doing bilingual education since 50, 60, 100 years ago. They all come with at least 2 if not 3 or 4 languages. In Germany, they're going to speak German, English, French, right?
Okay, quickly, Jackie, and then we're going to.
So, as for dual language teacher, so many of them are for a language teacher before. What brings you from a language for a language teacher to a dual language teacher? What kind of change? What made you make this change? And when you make the change, and then from only teaching language to teaching language for both language and contact with the challenge.
That's exactly what I did. I taught 3 years at the high school, Spanish, first couple years Spanish, and then I went to the elementary school where I started their magnet program and was their Spanish teacher. And I went into an elementary school where the year before I went, it had one of those principles where it was English only. Students, it was very strict that students were not allowed to speak Spanish. Bam, in walks Mary, and now everybody's talking to Mary, Miss McIntyre at the time, in Spanish. You know, she's going up to kids at the tables and we're speaking in Spanish, and their eyes just got big and they were huge, and they were so excited about being able to take what they do at home and bring it to school. And they were so excited that there was somebody in the building that was pronouncing their names correctly. You know, they just had all of this. And after a couple of years of doing that, I had to divide the students, and I was working through something that I was completely unfamiliar with, and that was working with a mix of native Spanish speakers and native English speakers, and I didn't have any training on that, and I was kind of working with that. And my second year in that dual language started in my school in kindergarten. And those are the classes that I didn't go into as an instructor, but I went into often as an observer. And I fell in love with just the idea of working with these students on moving them ahead academically in their native language. But yet at the same time, working with kids that came from the same background that I came from and getting them started in Spanish. I didn't start till I was in 9th grade. Small town in Iowa, we didn't have any Sesame Street. I learned uno, dos, tres, and that's it. And so I didn't have any exposure till 9th grade, and offer that to a set of students and be able to go beyond colors and numbers and, you know, rooms of a house. And so as an instructor, it gave me the opportunity to take what I knew and love about the language and just make it bigger.
All right, well, I'm going to wrap things up because we're a little bit late, but I just have a bunch of people to thank really quickly. First of all, my students. Thank you for existing, otherwise we wouldn't have this panel tonight, and for coming tonight and bringing desserts and drinks. Thank you to my department chair, Dr. Larry Sharman, for his support, and my colleagues, for all of you, for your support and for coming out tonight, and everybody in the community that cares about dual language and came tonight. I'm really thankful, and I hope that you got something out of it. Also, let's give a big round of applause for